Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Bloodborne on PS4. It has been some time since I've addressed a FromSoftware game on this show. Not to say they weren't making anything impactful, but because today's topic hit the gaming populace like a truck upon its debut. Whether you personally liked it or not, there was a time when this game was all the rage, and its echo is still being heard almost a decade later. Today I discuss 2015's Bloodborne. I personally encountered FromSoft's Souls series long ago for an hour on the PS3 with Demon's Souls, but it wasn't until I picked up Dark Souls late in the life of the Xbox 360 that I became enchanted by the formula FromSoft was putting forth of take great care, move slow, parry, dodge, then strike and repeat. As I said during my review of Dark Souls, it took me a while to come away from the mistaken gamer philosophy of get good and realize that the Souls games are not really hard nor as unfair as players made them out to be. But it was we, the players, who had become used to completing things in a rush and with a lot of hand-holding along the way, both as quality of life improvements in games, but also making things less complicated, with the games itself doing more of the heavy lifting during play to facilitate player retention and therefore ensuring steady and returning revenues for developers and publishers. We lost the ability to take it slow and enjoy the game for what it was, but also learn what the game was asking us. Now, I don't in any way excuse bad design or unfair mechanics. This is a hobby started in the arcades designed specifically to brutally suck up all the pocket change of kids and teenagers for decades before home console eclipsed the dens of pixelated iniquity, after all. But Dark Souls was not badly designed overall. Some questionable choices, but nothing that crippled the play or the game in its progress. Sadly, the Souls games had, in that time since their 2011 debut, quickly become a tool for gatekeeping among gamers, a sort of fucked up litmus test, with many players believing that only the chosen few, the gaming master race, could truly enjoy and experience the depth and breadth in the style of game that it had to offer. This is flat out wrong, and quite honestly vile. Don't gatekeep, assholes. Everyone has a right to be here and try things for themselves. Look, I love gaming. That should be obvious by now. But I never claimed I was truly good at it. You can love a hobby and not be the best that there is at it. I beat Dark Souls. That means you, yes, you, dear listener, can beat Dark Souls if you would like to as well. But in the 4 years since the release of Dark Souls, the team at FromSoft decided to take a different approach to a new game. Not a sequel to Dark Souls, which they had already done and which met with, shall we say, less than critical praise, but a new setting that moved away from the medieval fantasy as interpreted by Japanese developers. Instead, they settled on a world that would look more like a world resembling Eastern Europe just before the turn of the 20th century, a Europe during the reign of Queen Victoria. A world thick with Gothic architecture, and for younger listeners, I don't mean the moody eyeliner and all black wearing mall kids. I mean the actual architectural movement, where Bram Stoker and H.P. Lovecraft would sit down for tea and to chat. Although, come to think of it, Lovecraft probably would have hated Stoker for the sin of being born Irish and been afraid to leave his house for such a meeting. Anyway, this is the world of Bloodborne. Bloodborne is still very much a FromSoft game. There will still be vague secrets to uncover, lore hidden in a few sentences offered by item drops, and no matter what type of character you start building at the beginning of the game, you could go one of 100 directions by the end. But the biggest challenge from the previous game, and change along with it, is the associated universe. Bloodborne prioritized speed and aggression over slow plotting and hiding behind a shield. In fact, using a shield is useless here, and the best way to counter incoming damage is either to not be there when the hit lands, or to use your new sidearm, your gun, to interrupt an enemy at a key phase in their attack and stagger them, leaving them open for a destructive and deadly counterattack where you plunge your fist into their guts and pull out a few yards of intestine for their trouble. The story of Bloodborne is simple, yet it unfolds into a horror show that many in 2015 were not expecting. Your character, whoever they are ultimately, arrives at a back alley medical clinic in the city of Yarnum and awakens on a surgical table of a wheelchair-bound man who has medical gauze covering his eyes, as he has you sign a contract to help on the night of the Hunt, where the citizens of Yarnum once a year come out in force to slay beasts. We'll get to that in a minute. Upon signing your contract, your host says to be successful, you need to have some Yarnum blood of your own, and immediately begins to perform a blood transfusion for you, also warning you to forget anything you may see during this procedure and ignore it as hallucinations, which is good advice because your character drifts in and out of consciousness, where you see a werewolf made of blood arise out of a huge blood pool next to you before someone hurls a Molotov cocktail on it and sets it on fire, followed by a small horde of vagina-faced foot-tall humanoids that begin crawling all over you until you pass out, and a woman's voice says aloud, "Ah, you found yourself a hunter." Hell of an intro, I'll admit. From there you wake, weaponless and in Victorian dress, trying to piece together what has happened. You are in a clinic that does blood transfusions on a large scale, but there is a werewolf downstairs eating a corpse that you either have to punch to death or run from. Werewolves will be a common theme for the first half of the game, as those who routinely accept blood from Yarnum and its local religion, that is focused entirely on blood, the power of blood, and blood administration, turn into beasts, meaning werewolves and werewolf hybrids. So already, I was hooked. This world is ready for a survival horror werewolf game that wasn't anything related to the World of Darkness tabletop franchise, and I was there for it. And it is your job to wade into combat and slaughter. Good thing that you will recover small amounts of health as you get sprayed with gore, as your character will be dripping with the red stuff for most of the game, no matter what costume you wear. And it is not just werewolf hybrids that will be your target, but also mad hunters, driven to terrible frenzy by the moonlit night and the fury of the hunt itself, as men using hatchets, old swords, rifles, and torches attack you with the same ferocity as the foul beasts that they hunt. There is no jug full of orange Gatorade in your inventory that you use to recover your health like you did in the previous Souls games. Instead, you will be injecting yourself in the thigh over and over again all game long with syringes full of blood to recover your health. If you haven't guessed by now, blood and viscera is the currency of this game, and it arrives by the bucketful. But even still, early on there are hints that something else is going on beyond simply hunting werewolves out of folklore. There is a bizarre magic and events happening in the background, slowly at first, almost like they are glitches within the game. The beastmen fall away to other mutations and animals that have nothing to do with lycanthropy. Eventually the world drifts from sunset to full nightfall with every boss that you kill. First, a screaming nightmare who controls a bridge to the city's church that has been sealed off, and it towers over you. A sort of ram-werewolf hybrid that looks over your character like a living wall. Then a church hunter named Gascoigne that has gone mad with bloodlust and transforms into a hulking beast man as you hurt him more. Then you will access an old part of Yarnum, ruled entirely by wolfmen, burned and abandoned years before when one hunt went horribly wrong and so much of Yarnum's people were lost. And meet one of the game's earliest brick wall challenges, a monster that runs and leaps quite fast, spraying poison blood and spit everywhere, while shredding you with its claws and jaws. And then it is on to the church itself. Unless you want to take on a side mission where you hunt an eyeball-coated witch, where you will see the last moments of the High Priestess of the Healing Church, possibly the source of this nightmare, before she explodes from within her willowy maiden body into a 20-foot-tall borzoi and shreds of a dress on her. And upon the altar, after her death, you will find a huge, malformed skull with a psychic message from a grand magician somewhere which will lead you to the next phase of your hunt, and the moon finally rises as things get worse. Along the way, you must continue to seek pale blood, the source of the hunt itself. But with every boss you kill, and sometimes found in the form of fiery skulls that you'll gain, is something called insight, madness that is creeping up on you, but it will begin to reveal the actual truth of what is going on in Yharnam, that the blood is not human blood, but was originally sourced from a dormant outsider, something from out of the Lovecraftian mythos, that was entombed well below the lands of Yharnam when miners accidentally dug too deep and found it. And the church, thinking it was a sign from beyond, claimed it and began to study it in conjunction with the local university. Yharnam blood, it turns out, while it does provide miraculous cures for things like blood disorders, cancers, and diseases, it has a wonderful side effect of inducing madness and mutation, as the source is a fucking alien. There is also the matter of your lanterns, the bonfire for this adventure. However, in Bloodborne, the lanterns are really just markers of progress, as every time you die, and you will die, you resurrect back in the garden outside of a stately old manor, surrounded by grave markers and monitored by a living sex doll wearing typical 1800s grandmother's clothing, who will cash in your blood echoes, the game's currency, to improve your stats, and nearby fountains containing more of the little vagina-faced folk will allow you to buy new gear and consumables with blood. The grave markers on the right get you back to places you have previously visited. The grave markers on the left, well, we'll get to that. This second half of the game comes into play when you make your way to the original university and fight it out with an alien spider on the surface of a lake, where afterwards you see the vision of a very tall, veiled woman in a wedding dress with blood running out of her abdomen, and you awaken elsewhere to see the reality of the world around the healing church, with titanic alien beasts clinging to the steeples and vaults of the large buildings, where little blue men run around casting spells at you, and the rest of a horde of monsters that are twisted by outsider blood that dwarfs the monstrosity of the werewolves and subverts the whole of the survival horror RPG you have been involved in just a few hours before. You will cross dimensions, enter a university full of slugmen wearing British schoolboy outfits, find an asylum full of unnerving monstrosities in which houses something made of giant eyes and tentacles that you can try to communicate with. You will chase a madman through a labyrinth that loops back upon itself. You will climb to the apex of the healing church to fight the original outsider whose blood started it all. Then climb even farther into the heavens, where you will do battle with the wet nurse of the nightmare newborn. Whatever horror was supposed to be residing in the womb of the tall woman you met on the moonlit lake before it was ripped free from her body. And at last you will return to the stately mansion you have seen every time you died or returned to upgrade your gear, where you will fight it out with the man who first signed your contract at the beginning of the game. Turns out he can walk just fine, as well as fight. And some lunar hell beast named the Moon Presence, who is really beyond understanding, despite the fact that it looks like a gigantic skinned panther wearing the mask worn by the killer in Scream, and depending on either what specific items you found in the game or how you do in this final battle, you can get one of three endings. Be killed by the final boss and freed from the cycle of death and rebirth in Yharnam, kill this man and take over his job as the new Apex Hunter, or be reborn as a new infant outsider elder god. And all of this is just the main game. Remember I said that there were graves on the left side of your respawn point outside the mansion? Well, all of those lead to different areas of a vast underground proving ground catacomb network, all of which require bits and bobs like pounds of flesh, whopping huge blood clots, preserved eyes, mummified fetuses, and the like to enter various levels and fight it out with procedurally generated pathways full of monsters that didn't quite make the cut for the main game, or bosses specifically designed to only be fought in these so-called chalice dungeons, where some lore is added, but you don't really need to know much more than this is a self-imposed punishment looking to complete the hunt and wrap up more lore. The bosses, by the time you reach them, may not seem as tough, but many are stronger than the ones you fight in the main game, and will culminate in fighting the tall, bloodstained woman who got an unwanted abortion. And that's not all, kids. If you buy the DLC, you'll fight your way back in time through to the area where the poor fishing village that was the original Yharnam once stood, where all of this began, where the bounty of the sea came with a terrifying outsider poison that turned men into monsters and sea life into endlessly hungry fishmen. where the hunt truly began, as well as meeting some of the names you've only read about or had visions about in the main game, and must slaughter in their current vile forms. You'll fight the greatest hunter of her age to the death in a clock tower, and meet the mother of all alien sea life, whose half-human hybrid child was stripped from her womb when the fishermen of that ancient village dragged her ashore like whalers of old did, and have one of the toughest boss fights in all of video games beat you to death over and over with the very placenta he was formed in. But at least you can find new and wilder weapons not available in your current timeline. Bloodborne is a fucking wild ride from start to finish. It starts out as a spooky horror action game where you hunt werewolves on the night of the full moon and refresh your life with blood injections, to where it spins wildly out of control as by dawn you are attempting to slay eldritch abominations that are trying to descend to Earth and destroy all of reality because you signed a work contract and then got addicted to the job. There is a good goddamn reason this game is both infamous and ravenously beloved by its players. Well, players who had a PlayStation 4, that is. FromSoft has ardently refused, at least at the time of this writing, to allow Sony to port the game to PC, which they have eventually done with many other popular Sony titles. It is also jokingly said by players within the game's community, and the larger Souls community, that Bloodborne is the game that director Hidetaka Miyazaki hated and wanted to be left behind, which is why a decade later it has neither been ported, updated beyond the Old Hunters DLC, and there is no sign of a sequel on the horizon and likely never will be. Bloodborne is pretty much locked to the PS4, or PS5 if you have the original disc, or re-download it off the PS4 section of the company's network. So PC and Xbox players only know of Bloodborne in misunderstood memes, or, more usually, the complainers who didn't care much for it, or the rabid fanboys who did and oversold it. But that is the nature of game exclusives, I guess. Nothing much we can do about that. That's how these companies do business. But despite that, the game has been met with universal acclaim, which the game's journalists, giving it 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 scores, and 4 out of 5 and 5 out of 5 scores across the board. And it still sits at a robust 92 on Metacritic, although I trust Metacritic about as far as I can throw it. Yes, I know a lot of you out there see that site as gospel, but really, please, I continue to implore you, judge things for yourself. This is a step in the right direction towards having a happier life and making things better for everyone. I'm not going to reference anything the critics had to say because, fuck me, there's nothing of interest to say here beyond a generalized concept of excellent game. I hated half a dozen things about it, but excellent game. Here's all the stars. So, for as much as I've referenced the previous Dark Souls games in this review of Bloodborne, how does it compare or stand on its own? Well, it doesn't really, in either case. While many of the mechanics would later affect Dark Souls 3, it really does seem to be following the FromSoftware formula in the series, except swapping the Western fantasy interpreted by a Japanese skin for a Gothic horror/eldritch horror setting interpreted by a Japanese skin. But in this case, they have had a bit more work with horror and is a bit more universal, and therefore plenty of cultural Japanese examples of not only traditional horror, but also of other types of horror which FromSoft was able to utilize to make Bloodborne just hit harder. Also, Bloodborne is sort of its own thing, divorced from the other titles, and is generally lumped into the Souls Inheritors, which is generally accepted to include Sekiro and later Elden Ring. It may seem that the upcoming, again at the time of this recording, Armored Core game will be benefiting from what FromSoft has learned from making these games. So while you can compare it to its game family, it really does not do this individual game justice, as it does not really even compare to the games it has been loosely lumped into, other than to say that they too are their own thing and are from the same family, kind of like cousins that you only see at holiday times. So at the end of it all, what the fuck is Bloodborne? Well, I know a lot has been said about it, for good, bad, or indifferent, and a lot of ink has been spilled around it. But I can only give my thoughts on it. For me, Bloodborne is a survival horror, Gothic, and Lovecraftian fever dream role-playing game which is one of the toughest, most frustration-inducing, yet most rewarding titles out there. If you are into any of those ideas or genres, at all, that is. It is the result of Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley having a lovely garden picnic in the shadow of Windsor Palace while eating fistfuls of magic mushrooms and playing in the offal of the local abattoir. It is the coffee shop writings of Lovecraft, who decided to get out of his house, stop being a racist prick, smoked a blunt, and chilled out. It is the blood-soaked and eyeball-gouging Kingdom Hearts, where Sora develops a leather fetish and is flanked by Edgar Allan Poe and Junji Ito. This thing is a masterwork, whether by design or by accident, that is now quickly becoming a lost gem. But again, I say ultimately this is not a hard game. It is tricky. It rewards those who pay attention to the environment. It can be sometimes janky, that can result in an unintended death, but it can be completed. Yes, it took me about 2 years to complete it, with lots of stops and starts along the way. But this was also the game that tipped me in favor of getting a PS4 over an Xbox One, and I don't regret it. And it would seem game history is on my side in this one. But is it for you? How do I know? You're listening to my thoughts on it, but you need to find out for yourself. If you like cute independent puzzle games, this may not be for you. But how can I say that? Maybe you'll play this and find out you have a specific bloodlust that only can be satiated by Bloodborne. You may think you're the biggest digital tough guy around and recoil in terror the moment the first howling menace comes for you out of the dark. What I'm saying, and in this case reiterating, is that these are just my thoughts, and I fucking love this game. Do I think the game had problems? A few. Mostly load times, even with the patch update that reduced them. Some navigating of the environment, and you have to memorize the world map more than being able to check one. But I'm okay with that. And unless you know where certain weapons are that you want to use, and it's the build you're working towards, you can end up with something late game that is really cool, but you cannot use. But they have had this problem since the dawn of Demon's Souls days, and FromSoft has no desire to change that by now. But those are hardly the worst game sins out there. And we've had a lot worse from supposedly better companies. I could give a shit less about the frame rates, especially when those frame rates trigger my motion sickness. So if it seems pokey and slower to you by 2023 standards, then eat shit, I guess. There are also no settings for players with disabilities, but accessibility settings are something more common to games post-2020, so the lack thereof in Bloodborne is more of a common matter of the game being developed in the early 2010s, rather than some sort of personal slight against those players who would like to try it but would do better with accessibility settings. Then again, hell, I may need those settings soon myself. But seriously, this is a hard recommend. I would dare say if you are a PlayStation player but haven't tried this title, you should give it a shot, even if just to see what all the talk is about. So grab it on sale or something like that if you can. I wish I could recommend it to players on PC, Switch, or Xbox, but as I said earlier, it is tied to the PlayStation brand. Not much I or anyone else can do about that, which I think sucks, but then again, that's not my call. That's late-stage capitalism for you in relation to a non-necessity good. But not all is lost on the PC front. In January 2022, independent game developer Lilith Walther and her very small team did a port called of Bloodborne to the PC. Sort of. She, almost as a one-person development team, built Bloodborne PSX, a quote-unquote demake of the first few areas of the Bloodborne game with PlayStation 1 graphics and menu access, effectively making Bloodborne a proper return to the Nightmare Creatures days, which I have long said were Bloodborne games before Bloodborne was a thing. It is one of those fucking best things I have seen in a hell of a long time regarding games, and this lovely little game is startlingly faithful to the FromSoft original. Walther and her team even expand on some of the in-game lore, adding a whole new area inside a house the player would normally encounter only by seeing the outside of it in the original game, nearest to the first lantern you light in the game, and speak through the window to a dying man who at least tries to warn you of what may come before he succumbs to the healing church's blood. Now, you can enter the home and discover the terrible things that went on inside, and even confront your ill-fated guardian angel. Bloodborne PSX is a shining example of when there is a market and the company who owns the property is not serving it, then the independents will fill the market gap. And it is also a wonderful example of a transformative work in gaming. A game where the main thrust of a popular and well-known title is remixed and rebuilt in such a way that it becomes a fresh experience. And thank whatever God is listening for that. We need more of this type of change, taking titles that have had a limited run, or limited scope, or fallen behind the times, and making something new and fresh out of it. At time of recording, you can still find Bloodborne PSX for yourself on itch.io. Give it a try. You won't be disappointed. But Bloodborne, as a whole, has had a massive cultural impact despite the limited scope of its release. It is a game that I give a full recommendation to. Really, I say again, get your hands on this one way or another, even if only to try it out. Maybe it's for you, maybe it's not. But the one thing you cannot deny is the impact it has had on the gaming landscape. And to be honest, how many games coming out are trying to copy this winning formula? That should tell you something. Seek pale blood, transcend the hunt. And don't sign any contracts you haven't read over completely and with a lawyer present. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mass Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.